6 True Disturbing Psycho Sister Horror Stories. Hello everyone. Tonight, we're not just telling stories, we're opening old wounds. We're peering into the darkest corners of the most intimate relationships, the ones forged in childhood, meant to be unbreakable. Because sometimes the people who know us best, the ones who share our blood, are the very ones who can unravel us completely. Before we descend into these chilling tales, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling us where you're listening from and what time it is. Your engagement helps YouTube bring more stories like these out of the shadows and into the light. The Sister in the Shadows. Hello everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now let the shadows take over. When my sister Jenna first moved in, I told myself it was a temporary arrangement, a few weeks, maybe a month at most, until she could piece her life back together. My 2-bedroom rental just outside Dayton had always felt too vast, too quiet, especially at night. So the initial thought of having company again, a familiar face, wasn't entirely unwelcome. But the Jenna who arrived on my doorstep wasn't the sister I remembered from our childhood. Her movements were subtly off. Her voice held a strange cadence, and even her laughter, a low, deliberate sound, as if she were consciously reminding herself how to perform it, sent a shiver down my spine. It was like looking at a familiar painting, only to find the colors had shifted, the lines subtly distorted. The first week, I'd often wake in the dead of night, around 3 or 4 in the morning, to find the hallway lights blazing. Jenna's bedroom door would be ajar, a sliver of darkness visible, but the room itself seemed untouched. Her bed, perfectly made, the blinds meticulously drawn, not a single item out of place. Yet from the living room I'd catch the faint rhythmic creak of floorboards, a slow, deliberate pacing, heel to toe. Each time I'd venture out, the house would be plunged back into a heavy, stale silence, utterly empty. By the second week, her stories began. Not just any stories, but vivid, unsettling tales of our past that I knew with absolute certainty had never happened. One evening, over a dinner I could barely taste, she casually asked if I remembered the time our mother had locked me in the basement for 2 days without food. My fork, laden with pasta, froze halfway to my mouth. I stared at her, my voice barely a whisper. "Jenna, that never happened." She simply smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips, and leaned forward. "That's because you don't remember it," she whispered, her eyes holding mine. "But I do." I tried to dismiss it, to laugh it off as a dark joke or a vivid dream. But she wouldn't let it go. Every night, a new, fabricated memory would surface. Me drowning in the bathtub at 6, sleepwalking into the street at 9, screaming her name in the middle of the night because something was in my room. None of it was true, yet she'd look at me with an unnerving intensity, as if she were watching me relive these phantom traumas in real time. A small, insidious seed of doubt began to sprout in the back of my mind. The first truly horrifying incident struck on a Thursday. I was in the shower, the steam coiling around me, when I heard the bathroom door creak open. The mirror was completely fogged, but I swore I saw a shadowy figure standing just inside the doorway. "Jenna?" I called out, my voice muffled by the water. No answer. Just a thick, heavy silence before the door clicked shut again. When I ripped the curtain back, the room was empty. But the mirror was defiled. Not with lipstick, not with soap, but with deep, jagged letters scratched directly into the glass itself. They read, "She's awake. Don't open your eyes tonight." I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The mirror had been pristine that morning. No cracks, no marks. Panic seizing me, I ran to Jenna's room. She was sitting on the floor, her back to me, rocking slowly, whispering to herself. "Jenna, what did you do to the mirror?" I demanded, my voice trembling. She turned her head just enough for me to see that slow, deliberate smile. "I didn't write it," she whispered, her eyes glinting in the dim light. "You did." That night, sleep was an impossible luxury. Every creak, every settling groan of the old house made my skin crawl. Around 2 a.m., exhaustion finally won, and I shut my eyes. That's when I heard it. A voice. My own voice, soft, broken, whispering my name from the hallway. I shot upright, my heart hammering against my ribs, and stared at the door. A shadow under the crack revealed bare feet standing there. I yanked the door open, but the hallway was empty. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself I was losing my mind, that it was the lack of sleep, the overwhelming stress. But then I looked down. The hardwood floor outside my room was covered in wet footprints. Small ones, the exact size of my own. I followed them, a cold dread creeping up my spine, past Jenna's room. Her door was wide open. She wasn't inside. The footprints led straight into the bathroom, where the mirror, now completely shattered through the middle, reflected something that made me stagger back. A choked gasp escaping my lips. It wasn't my reflection staring back. It was her, Jenna. But she was standing exactly where I was, mirroring my every move. And as I stood there, frozen, not breathing, the reflection raised one hand and traced my name across the broken glass in blood-red letters. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, every light in the room blazing, staring at the door, half expecting Jenna to walk in, half expecting something far worse. The image in the mirror replayed endlessly in my mind. The vacant stare, the chilling smile, the blood-red inscription. By morning, Jenna was back in her room, her bed perfectly made, closet shut, blinds drawn. She acted as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't spent half the night haunting my hallway. When I asked her why she wasn't in her bed, she tilted her head, that unsettling smile playing on her lips. Because you were in there instead. That's when the horrifying truth began to solidify. She wasn't just telling lies, she was actively trying to rewrite my memories, to warp my perception of reality. And the most terrifying part? A small, traitorous part of me was starting to wonder if, just maybe, she was right. Over the next few days, the house itself seemed to turn against me. My keys, left on the kitchen counter, would reappear on the coffee table. The front door, locked securely, would be found ajar an hour later. My phone alarm would shriek in the middle of the night, set for times I hadn't programmed. Each unsettling incident, Jenna was nearby, watching. Not with anger, not with a smirk, but with an unnerving, analytical gaze, as if she were studying my reactions, cataloging my unraveling. One night, I heard movement in the spare bedroom, her room technically, though she was supposed to be sleeping in mine. The floorboards groaned, a familiar, rhythmic pacing. My chest tightened as I pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, but I could discern the faint outline of a figure moving near the window. I flipped the light on. The room was empty. Bed made, blinds shut, the air still and undisturbed. But on the carpet, fresh footprints were pressed into the pile, leading right past me into the hallway. I spun around, a scream catching in my throat. Jenna was standing inches away, blocking the doorway. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide, unblinking. She leaned so close I could feel her breath on my cheek and whispered, "Stop walking in my room when I'm not here." I shoved past her, the sheer terror propelling me, and locked myself in my bedroom. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't endure much more. The next morning, I began frantically searching for new apartments online, but before I could even finish one listing, my phone buzzed. A text from Jenna. It was a photo of me, sitting at the kitchen table. Except I wasn't sitting there. I was in my bedroom, the door still locked. That's when the final horrifying realization hit me. There weren't two of us in this house. There were three. Me, Jenna, and something else. Something that looked like us both. The next night shattered me completely. I woke to the sound of someone whispering directly into my ear. I bolted upright, but the room was empty. My skin crawled as I recognized the whisper as my own voice, repeating a single chilling phrase over and over. "She's awake, she's awake, she's awake." I staggered into the bathroom, desperate to splash cold water on my face to shock myself back to reality. But when I looked into the mirror, it wasn't me staring back. It wasn't Jenna either. It was a face caught halfway between the two of us. Eyes too wide, jaw hanging loose, skin pale and stretched thin, a grotesque parody of both our features. The thing in the mirror leaned forward and whispered, "One of us has to go." And then, with a sickening pop, the bathroom light flickered out. I ran, tripping over my own feet, bolting for the front door. I yanked it open, but Jenna was already standing on the porch, blocking my escape. Her face was unnervingly calm, her smile slow and deliberate. She tilted her head and said, "You finally saw her." Behind me, from inside the house, I heard footsteps running toward us. 2 sets, heavy, fast. I didn't wait to see who or what they belonged to. I shoved past Jenna and sprinted into the night, barefoot, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't stop until I reached the 24-hour gas station down the street, where the cashier stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I told myself I'd go back with the police, that I'd get answers, but I never did. I never set foot in that house again. And sometimes, late at night, I still get text messages. Photos of me, sitting alone in rooms I haven't been in for years, always with the same caption, "She's awake."
2. The farmhouse's embrace. When my sister, Emily, inherited our grandmother's sprawling farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, I genuinely believed she'd finally caught a break. The place was ancient, certainly, with patches of decay and a perpetual creak in its bones, but it was undeniably solid. A grand wraparound porch, floors that groaned with history, and a vast backyard that bled into endless cornfields stretching out like a golden ocean under the summer sky. It was the kind of property city dwellers would kill for, a slice of pastoral dream. But Emily didn't move into the farmhouse like any normal person would. There was no furniture, no attempt at decoration, not even the basic courtesy of setting up electricity in half the rooms. Instead, she dragged her sleeping bag into the master bedroom and illuminated the cavernous space with a collection of flickering candles, as if she were deliberately reenacting the 1800s. When I, bewildered, asked her why, she merely offered a faint, unsettling smile and whispered, "Because the house doesn't like the lights." I forced a laugh, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. I remembered something then. Grandma, in her later years, had rarely ventured upstairs. Her life had been confined almost entirely to the kitchen, her worn recliner, and the small downstairs bathroom. Whenever I'd pressed her about the upper floors, she'd simply mutter, "That part of the house isn't mine anymore." The first night I stayed to help Emily unpack, I woke abruptly around 3 a.m. to the sound of a low, tuneless humming. It seemed to emanate from directly beneath the floorboards, a deep, resonant vibration. At first, I dismissed it as a dream, a trick of the sleepy mind. But the moment I sat upright, the humming ceased instantly, as if it had been waiting for me to notice, to acknowledge its presence. The next morning, I cautiously asked Emily if she'd been awake. She looked at me with an odd, almost vacant expression, then said, "I don't sing when I'm alone." A beat of silence. "She does." I tried to brush it off, but the incident lingered, a discordant note in the quiet house. As the days bled into one another, I started to notice the doors. Every single door in the house, bedrooms, closets, even the pantry, was fitted with heavy, ornate brass bolts. Not on the outside for security, but on the inside. It was as if every previous occupant had desperately sought a way to lock themselves in. All that is, except for one, the basement door. That one had no lock at all. Just a simple handle, polished smooth and dark, as if thousands of hands had gripped it over countless years. One afternoon, while sifting through forgotten junk in the dusty shed, my fingers brushed against a shoebox, half buried near the grimy basement window. Inside, nestled amongst yellowed newspaper clippings, were photographs of me. Some were innocent family snapshots from years ago, but others looked like they had been taken while I was sleeping, candid and invasive. And in every single one, my face had been violently scratched out, black ink gouging deep into the paper, obliterating my features. I stormed inside, shaking with a mixture of fear and rage, and confronted Emily. She didn't deny it. She didn't even look embarrassed. She simply tilted her head, her eyes unnervingly calm, and said, "I need to make sure you stay. If you keep leaving, she gets angry." I demanded to know who she was. Emily offered no answer. She merely turned, walked with a deliberate slowness toward the basement door, and closed it softly behind her, leaving me alone in the echoing silence. That night, the image of my defaced photographs haunted me. Around 2 a.m., the house began to creak with footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling the downstairs, a phantom patrol. I sat up in bed, every nerve ending screaming, listening as they moved to the base of the stairs. Then, silence. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, waiting for them to retreat. But instead, I heard something far worse, a scratching. Long, sharp fingernails dragging up the banister, step by agonizing step until they reached the top. I shot out of bed, flung open my door. The hallway was empty. But when I looked down at the banister, fresh, deep grooves were carved into the ancient wood, undeniable proof of a terrifying presence. By morning, Emily acted as if nothing had happened. She sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, her hair flat and her eyes bloodshot, a clear sign she hadn't slept a wink. I tried to bring up the scratches, the undeniable violation of the house, but she only smiled, a faint, knowing curve of her lips. "She was just reminding you," she murmured, her voice soft as a caress. "You belong here." I decided then and there that I was done. That evening, I packed a small bag, my hands trembling, and headed for the front door. But when I grabbed the knob, it wouldn't turn. The lock was gone, literally gone. The entire hardware plate was missing, screws dangling uselessly like severed threads, as if someone had violently ripped it out during the night. I tried the windows. Every single one was nailed shut. Even the glass panes in the kitchen had been painted over from the outside, sealing us in. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my chest as I checked the back door. Same thing, no lock, just bare, splintered wood where the mechanism had been. And then I heard her voice, calm, almost casual, drifting up from the shadowy basement stairwell. "You're not supposed to leave after dark. It's her rule." I turned slowly, my blood running cold. Emily was standing at the bottom of the stairs, holding a single, flickering candle. Her face was half shrouded in shadow, her eyes glinting like wet stones in the dim light. The flame cast her shadow long and grotesque across the wall, crooked and twitching, like something with too many limbs. "I set everything up for us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the frantic pounding of my heart. "It's time to finish what she started." Before I could even process her words, she blew the candle out. The hallway collapsed into an absolute suffocating blackness. I heard her bare feet thudding against the steps, rushing upward, fast. I bolted for the nearest bedroom, slammed the door shut, and shoved my heavy dresser against it with all my might. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. And in that dark, suffocating silence I heard it, her nails scratching on the wood of the door. Not pounding, not kicking, but scratching, slow, steady, deliberate, a sound that burrowed deep into my bones. And then, in the quietest voice imaginable, Emily whispered through the crack, "You were supposed to sleep downstairs tonight." I didn't sleep. I sat huddled against the bedroom wall, the dresser a flimsy barricade against the door, every muscle locked tight, waiting for the scratching to stop. At some point, near the first hint of dawn, the sound finally ceased. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes, weak sunlight was slipping through the cracks in the curtains. I pushed the dresser back carefully, half expecting Emily to be waiting for me in the hall, her eyes glinting in the dim light. But when I opened the door, the upstairs was silent, too silent. Her room was empty, her sleeping bag neatly folded, a chilling tableau of normalcy. For a second, a flicker of hope, I thought maybe she had gone outside. But then I noticed something. Every single door upstairs, my room, the closets, the bathroom, had fresh, heavy locks bolted on from the outside. While I had been sleeping, someone had meticulously screwed heavy latches into the ancient wood, one by agonizing one. My stomach dropped as I realized the only door without a lock was the basement. The smell hit me before I even reached it. Damp concrete, yes, but mixed with something sharp and metallic, something utterly foul. I forced myself to open the basement door, and a draft of air rushed past me, colder, heavier than the rest of the house. The wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, and halfway down I saw the light. Candles. Dozens of them, their flames dancing, lining the basement floor in a rough, imperfect circle. And in the center, Emily knelt, humming that same low, tuneless melody I'd heard my first night. Her arms were smeared with something dark, something viscous, and in front of her lay a long wooden box. An old coffin, its lid cracked and warped from years of dampness, its surface stained with age. My chest tightened, a cold dread seizing me. "Emily, what the hell is this?" She looked up at me, her eyes hollow, her mouth curled in that faint, unsettling smile. "She's still here," she whispered, her voice a breathy rasp. "Grandma kept her locked away, but I let her out." I backed toward the stairs, a primal urge to flee consuming me. But she shot to her feet, knocking over a candle, its flames sputtering out. "Don't you dare leave," she hissed, her voice sharp now, nothing like the flat calm she'd had before. She chose us. She wants us to stay together. If you walk out, you'll tear the family apart. My legs shook uncontrollably as I scrambled backward up the steps, but before I could reach the top, the basement door slammed shut on its own. The sound echoed through the house, a final, definitive clang, and the lock clicked into place. I was trapped inside, with her. Emily began to open the coffin. The lid creaked, a sound of ancient wood protesting, and the smell that poured out made me gag, a stench of decay and something else, something indescribable. But it wasn't bones inside. It was objects. Dolls with their eyes torn out, bundles of hair tied with twine, photographs of our family, every face scratched out except hers. She lifted one of the dolls, holding it close, almost tenderly. "I've been feeding her," she murmured, her voice regaining its unsettling calm. "That's why she lets me stay." My throat went dry, my voice a desperate croak. "Feeding her what?" Emily turned her head slowly, smiling in that broken, deliberate way. Then she pointed to the wall. I hadn't noticed it before. In the far corner of the basement, chained to the concrete, were marks. Long, deep scratches, gouged into the wall like fingernails dragged across it for years. And just below them, something else. Stains. Brown, flaking stains that had seeped into the porous stone, a horrifying testament to unspeakable acts. "She doesn't like it when people leave," Emily whispered, her voice a chilling lullaby. "That's why Grandma stayed downstairs for years. That's why I called you here, so I wouldn't be alone when she comes back." Suddenly, every candle in the basement flickered at once, their flames dancing wildly. The air shifted, heavy, suffocating, pressing in on me. My ears popped, like the pressure had changed drastically. And then I heard it. Not Emily's. Low, guttural, vibrating through the very floorboards, a sound that resonated deep within my chest. It said my name. I bolted for the door, slamming my fists against it until my hands bled, a desperate, futile attempt at escape. Emily shrieked behind me, her voice cracking with something inhuman, something ancient. "She chose you! She chose you!" The lock finally gave, a splintering sound, and I stumbled into the hallway, sprinting for the front door. But when I reached it, the knob twisted in my hand. The hardware was back, perfectly intact, gleaming as if it had never been removed. I yanked it open and ran barefoot across the yard, not daring to look back, until the farmhouse was nothing but a distant, menacing speck against the horizon. I never went back. I didn't answer Emily's calls. Eventually, she stopped leaving voicemails, but sometimes in the dead of night, I still get texts from unknown numbers. Photos of that basement, photos of the coffin. And the last one I received just last week wasn't a photo at all. It was a video. 30 seconds of absolute darkness, 30 seconds of ragged, unsettling breathing. And then right at the end, Emily's voice, a chilling whisper. She says, "You're next."
Five. The archivist of lives. I hadn't stepped foot in my childhood home in over a decade. After our parents passed, I fled, moving out as fast as my 2 feet could carry me. The old farmhouse, with its creaking walls, its sagging porch steps, and the oppressive shadows that clung to every corner like a persistent mold, held too many memories I desperately wanted to bury. I figured my sister, Marjorie, who had chosen to remain behind, a silent sentinel in the decaying structure, would eventually sell it. But she never did. She stayed. And when her call came this spring, a soft, almost hesitant request for me to visit, I almost said no. Almost. Something in her voice, a subtle undertone I couldn't quite decipher, made me think refusing would only make things worse, would only delay in an inevitable confrontation. The drive out felt profoundly strange. The familiar road, which I remembered as a patchwork of cracks and bumps, was now freshly paved, smooth and unnervingly perfect. The old, leaning mailbox had been replaced with a gleaming new one, the lawn meticulously cut, the flower beds meticulously lined with perfect rows of pristine white stones. It was as if Marjorie had been preparing for me, orchestrating my arrival with an unsettling precision. When I parked my car, the engine still ticking with residual heat, she was already waiting at the door. The same slender figure, the same faint, almost ethereal smile, but there was something subtly off in her eyes, a depth that hadn't been there before, a glint of something cold and calculating. She hugged me tight, a surprisingly firm embrace, and whispered, "Welcome home." It didn't sound like a greeting. It sounded like a sentence. Inside, the house felt eerily frozen in time, yet simultaneously altered. The familiar scent of lemon polish, mixed with the faint, sour bite of mildew, still permeated the air. The same faded photos adorned the walls, the same worn rug lay in the hallway. I felt like I'd stepped into a meticulously preserved past, a museum of my own childhood. But there was an unsettling order to everything. The kitchen was spotless, gleaming, every counter scrubbed to a blinding sheen. The living room looked staged, like a museum exhibit. Every cushion plumped, every book aligned. Even the picture frames were dusted and perfectly aligned, their glass reflecting the sterile perfection. It was too perfect, an artificial stillness that made my skin prickle. We sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea from delicate porcelain cups, and I tried to make small talk, to bridge the chasm of years and unspoken truths. But my eyes kept wandering, drawn inexorably to the basement door. It was a relic of my childhood fears, painted shut when we were kids, always damp, always dark, a forbidden zone. Marjorie had always been terrified of going down there alone, convinced it harbored spiders and nameless shadows. Now she acted as if it didn't exist, her gaze carefully avoiding it. So of course I asked, "Have you cleaned the basement?" Her teacup clinked loudly, a sharp, jarring sound in the quiet room as she set it down. "Don't worry about that," she said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. "That part of the house is mine." Her eyes, cold and unwavering, didn't leave mine until I, unnerved, finally looked away. That night, after she had retired to her room, the unsettling curiosity became an unbearable itch. The hallway creaked under my hesitant feet as I made my way to that old basement door. To my surprise, the thick, peeling paint seal was gone. A brand new, gleaming deadbolt glimmered under the dim bulb, a stark contrast to the aged wood. She had unlocked it earlier, I realized with a jolt, and I hadn't even noticed, so consumed was I by her unsettling presence. The stairs groaned a protest as I descended into the oppressive dark, each step echoing in the silence. The air was thick, almost syrupy, the smell of dust and old paper hitting the back of my throat, mingling with a faint metallic tang. I expected boxes, broken furniture, perhaps dad tools, forgotten relics of a bygone era. But no. Instead, I found filing cabinets, dozens of them. Heavy, gray, industrial-looking cabinets, lined up neatly along the concrete walls like an archive, stretching into the gloom. Each one was labeled in stark black marker, the handwriting precise, chillingly familiar. My stomach dropped, a cold, sickening lurch, as I read the words stenciled on the drawers. Darren, school. Darren, friends. Darren, jobs. My hands shook violently as I opened the first drawer, the metal groaning in protest. Inside were folders. Manila, neatly stacked, filled with my report cards, old essays, detention slips. Not copies, but the originals, even the ones I swore I had thrown away, meticulously preserved. Another drawer yielded photographs. Me at prom, awkward and grinning. Me with my first girlfriend, her arm around my waist. Me on my college campus, a hopeful, naive young man. Some were candid shots I'd never seen before, taken from angles that suggested she'd been there, watching, documenting my life from the shadows. Then I found the thickest folder yet, labeled in bold, block letters, Darren, medical. Inside were copies of prescriptions, detailed notes from doctors, appointment summaries. Words like anxiety, unstable, compulsive tendencies were circled in red pen, highlighted with a chilling emphasis. Some files were from clinics I barely remembered visiting, fleeting moments of vulnerability I thought long forgotten. Yet here they were, cataloged, archived, every weakness, every crack in my life laid bare for her meticulous scrutiny. I kept digging, a desperate, frantic search for an explanation, a way out of this nightmare. Another folder stopped me cold. Printed emails. My emails. Arguments from past girlfriends, desperate apologies to bosses, intimate messages I never thought anyone else had seen. They were highlighted, annotated in the margins in Marjorie's neat, precise handwriting. Words like failure, weak, unfit, jumped out at me, searing themselves into my mind. And then, at the very bottom of the drawer, I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope, labeled in stark block letters. Darren, future. I hesitated, my pulse thundering in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside was a single page, my obituary, my full name, date of birth, and a death date, left chillingly blank. Beneath it, a draft eulogy, written in her elegant, looping handwriting. Darren Vale lived a troubled life, but he found peace at last, thanks to the care and protection of his devoted sister, Marjorie. The single, bare basement light bulb above me buzzed and flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock my terror. And from the top of the stairs, her voice floated down, calm and steady, utterly devoid of surprise. "I told you that basement was mine." I froze at the bottom of the stairs, the obituary trembling in my hand, a flimsy testament to a life she was trying to claim. Marjorie's silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by the harsh hall light, a dark, imposing figure. She didn't shout, didn't rush, didn't betray any emotion. She simply descended, one deliberate step at a time, her heels clicking against the wood like a metronome counting down my final moments. "Do you see now?" she asked softly, her voice a chilling caress. "You were never capable of carrying your own story. I had to take care of it for you." Her calmness, her utter lack of remorse, made my skin crawl worse than if she had screamed, worse than any overt threat. I backed into the nearest cabinet, the folders inside rattling like dry bones. "You've been spying on me," I stammered, my voice hoarse with terror. "Stalking me. Why would you do this?" She reached the concrete floor, her hand trailing along the cabinets like a curator admiring her collection. "Because you never remembered the details, Darren. You never valued the truth. Someone had to write the record. Someone had to keep you consistent." I shook my head, a desperate, futile gesture. "This isn't truth. This is obsession." She smiled faintly, a ghost of a smile. "Truth is what survives." Marjorie opened another cabinet drawer, this one labeled Darren Relationships. She pulled out a folder and let the papers flutter to the ground, a cascade of stolen memories. Photos of me with girlfriends, notes about our fights, bank statements from shared apartments. On one photo, her handwriting curved across the bottom margin. "She will leave him by September. She always would." I felt sick, a wave of nausea washing over me. "You don't get to decide my life." "But I already have," she said, her voice a chilling pronouncement. She reached into her pocket and produced a small tape recorder, an old handheld device, its plastic casing worn smooth. She pressed play. My voice filled the basement, shaky and pleading, from a phone call years ago after a particularly brutal breakup. She had recorded it, all of it. "See," she whispered, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Even your pain belongs to me." I lunged for the stairs, a desperate, animalistic surge of adrenaline. But she was faster than I remembered, her movements surprisingly swift. She slammed the basement door shut above us, the sound echoing through the confined space, twisting the lock with a deliberate, sickening click. I was trapped. "Sit," she ordered, her voice sharp, pointing at the cold concrete floor. I didn't. I couldn't. My chest was heaving, my eyes darting frantically for anything to fight with, anything to use as a weapon. Her tone sharpened, a steel edge entering her voice. "Sit." And to my horror, my body obeyed. My legs buckled, and I folded onto the floor like a scolded child, trained by years of her subtle dominance, her insidious control. She knelt across from me, her gaze unwavering, and slid a fresh folder from the future envelope. Inside was a set of forms, psychiatric evaluations, medical recommendations, even a petition for long-term care. All pre-signed, my name forged with chilling precision. Her name, Marjorie Vale, was written neatly in the Guardian box. "They'll believe it," she said gently, her voice almost tender. "They'll always believe me. I've got every record to prove you unstable, every paper trail, every photograph. By the time I'm finished, Darren Vale will no longer exist. He'll just be my story." Tears stung my eyes, hot and bitter. "You can't erase me." Marjorie leaned closer, her breath warm against my ear, a chilling intimacy. "You already let me." I don't remember how long we sat there in that suffocating basement. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The single light bulb overhead flickered, a dying star. The faint hum of the refrigerator upstairs, the only reminder of time moving, of a world beyond this concrete tomb. Finally, she stood, smoothing her skirt, her movements unhurried, deliberate. She slid the obituary back into its envelope, tucked it under her arm like a prized possession, and walked toward the stairs. "Get some rest," she said over her shoulder, her voice a chilling benediction. "Tomorrow we'll start drafting your ending properly." The lock clicked shut above me, a final, definitive sound. The basement went black, plunging me into an absolute suffocating darkness. And in that silence, surrounded by cabinets filled with every secret, every failure, every stolen memory of my life, I realized something that broke me more than anything else. She wasn't just writing my history, she was convincing me it was true. Up 6, the guardian's embrace. The last thing I remembered was the mundane, almost absurd, act of standing in line at the grocery store. My mind was preoccupied, debating the merits of expensive coffee beans against the dwindling cash in my wallet. Then, a sudden, disorienting swim of vision, a sickening lurch in my stomach, and my knees buckled beneath me. Everything went white. When consciousness slowly, painfully returned, I found myself lying in a hospital bed. The harsh fluorescent lights above buzzed with an irritating, incessant hum, and an IV line tugged uncomfortably at the crook of my arm. For a fleeting second, a wave of profound relief washed over me. Someone had helped me. I was safe. Then I turned my head. She was there. My sister, Lorraine. She sat perfectly still in the corner chair, an almost regal posture, legs crossed elegantly, hands folded neatly in her lap. A faint, knowing smile played on her lips as if she had been patiently waiting for this exact moment. "You fainted, Curtis," she said softly, her voice a calm, almost soothing balm. "But don't worry, you're safe now." My throat was parched, a desert. I pushed myself upright, a jolt of pain shooting through my head, and that's when I saw it, a white plastic band around my wrist. My name, a barcode, and beneath it, in bold, stark letters, Guardian, Lorraine Hart. A cold, sickening dread began to spread through my veins. "What the hell is this?" I croaked, my voice raw and unfamiliar. Lorraine stood, smoothing the imaginary wrinkles from her skirt, her movements precise and unhurried. "They needed someone to authorize your care," she explained, her voice still unnervingly calm. "You weren't in any shape to speak for yourself." I yanked at the IV line, a desperate, futile gesture, my heart racing like a trapped bird. "I don't need a guardian. Take this off." The door opened before she could answer. A silent, almost choreographed entrance. A nurse stepped in, her gaze sweeping first to Lorraine, a deferential nod before briefly flicking to me. "How's he doing today?" she asked, her tone professional, yet subtly directed at my sister. Lorraine smiled politely, a picture of concerned sisterly devotion. "He's still a little confused," she said, her voice laced with a gentle pity, "but he'll settle once the medication evens out." I froze, the words hitting me like a physical blow. "I'm not confused," I shouted, my voice cracking. The nurse, ignoring my protest, placed a small paper cup filled with pills in my hand, her expression calm but firm. "This will help you relax." I tried to hand it back, my fingers trembling. "I don't want." "Curtis," Lorraine said sharply, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. One word. A command. The nurse just nodded at her, her eyes unwavering, and waited. My skin prickled with a horrifying realization. Nobody in that room was listening to me, only her. The day dragged on, a slow, suffocating nightmare. Every time I tried to ask questions, what happened? How long had I been here? Why was I here? Lorraine answered for me, her explanations smooth, plausible, utterly convincing to the staff. The nurses scribbled diligently on their charts, nodding at her words, never once meeting my desperate gaze. When I asked for my phone, the nurse said, "Your sister has it." When I pleaded to call a friend, Lorraine cut in smoothly, her hand resting gently on my arm. "Not while he's unstable, dear." Even the doctor, a man with a kind face and tired eyes, seemed blind to it. He came in during the afternoon, clipboard in hand, his white coat gleaming under the sterile lights. He barely glanced at me before speaking directly to Lorraine. "We'll keep him for a few more days. Observation, blood work, adjustments as needed." Lorraine's hand brushed my arm, a possessive gesture, and she said, "I'll make sure he complies." "I don't need to stay," I shouted, my voice hoarse with frustration. "I walked in here fine." But the doctor only wrote something down on his chart, muttering, "Agitation persists." It was like being erased in real time, my identity slowly, meticulously being overwritten. That evening, a tray of food arrived. Mushy, bland vegetables, a small carton of milk, and a tasteless pudding. I pushed it away, my stomach churning with a mixture of fear and disgust. Minutes later, Lorraine returned, another pill cup in her hand. I said no. I told her, my voice rising. She set the cup down on the tray, her smile fixed, unyielding. Babies always fight their medicine at first. The nurse, standing silently by, laughed lightly at her joke, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. My blood ran cold. Lorraine lifted the cup herself, her fingers surprisingly strong, pressing it toward my lips. The nurse stood by, not interfering, not questioning, her presence a silent endorsement, as if this was a perfectly routine procedure. I knocked it away, the pills scattering across the pristine white sheet like tiny, malevolent eyes. For a moment, a fleeting, desperate moment, I felt a surge of triumph, but the nurse silently produced another cup from her pocket. 2 more pills. "Try again," Lorraine said, her smile fixed, her eyes sharp as glass, utterly devoid of warmth. Later that night, I made my first desperate attempt at escape. The hallway beyond my room was quiet, save for the occasional squeak of rubber soles on polished linoleum. I slid the IV needle out, grimacing as a bead of blood welled at the puncture site. My body screamed for me to lie back down, to surrender to the exhaustion, but I staggered toward the door anyway, propelled by a primal urge for freedom. The second my trembling fingers touched the handle, the alarm on the IV monitor shrieked, a piercing, electronic wail that echoed through the silent hall. She was already there. Lorraine stepped from the shadows of the hall, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her eyes shining in the low light. Not shocked, not panicked, but almost satisfied. "You'll only hurt yourself, Curtis," she said calmly, her voice a chilling whisper. She pressed the call button, and 2 nurses rushed in, their faces impassive, carrying fresh supplies. They didn't scold me. They didn't ask questions. They just worked quickly, efficiently, like they had expected this, like it was a pre-planned part of my care. As the new IV slid into my arm, a fresh sting of pain, Lorraine leaned close, brushing my hair back from my sweat-soaked forehead. "You can't even trust your own body anymore," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "But you can trust me." That night, I lay staring at the white plastic bracelet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a constant, irritating drone. My name, printed in bold letters. Her name, Lorraine Hart, beneath it, defining me, owning me. It hit me then, with a sickening clarity. I wasn't here to heal. I was here because she wanted me trapped. And now, everyone in this sterile, indifferent building believed she was the one saving me, the devoted sister sacrificing her time for her unstable brother. I didn't sleep that night. Every time my eyelids sagged, threatening to drag me into unconsciousness, I'd snap awake, convinced Lorraine was standing there in the dark, watching me, her silent gaze a physical weight. By morning, the fluorescent lights felt like interrogation lamps, stripping away any pretense of comfort. A nurse came in to take my vitals. She smiled warmly, but didn't look me in the eye. Her questions once again were directed to Lorraine, who had somehow appeared in the room before I even noticed the door open, a silent, ever-present shadow. "Has he been eating?" the nurse asked, her pen poised over her clipboard. "Not much," Lorraine answered smoothly, tucking the blanket tighter around me, a gesture of maternal concern. "But that's normal. He's always been picky." The nurse chuckled, a light, dismissive sound, as if it were a sweet anecdote. My blood boiled. "I'm sitting right here," I snapped, my voice raw with frustration. But the nurse only wrote something in the chart. Paranoid? Later that day, I heard the low murmur of voices outside my room. Doctors, Lorraine? Their words floated in and out, fragments of a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Longer-term care. Compliance issues. Recommend psych eval. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. When Lorraine walked back in, her face serene, I demanded answers. "What did you tell them?" She sat in the chair by the window, crossing her legs delicately, her composure unnerving. "That you need help. Real help. Not just a few days. You can't manage on your own anymore, Curtis." She paused, her gaze unwavering, and they listened. My stomach dropped, a cold, sickening plunge. "You're lying." She smiled faintly, a ghost of a smile. "Check the bracelet." I looked down. Same white band, same bold letters. Guardian, Lorraine Hart. That night, a man in a crisp gray suit visited. Not a doctor, not a nurse. He carried a thin folder, spoke softly, his voice devoid of emotion, and laid papers on the tray in front of me. "Your sister has petitioned for your continued care," he explained, his words carefully chosen. "Just a routine transfer to a longer-term facility. Nothing to worry about." I shoved the folder back, my hands shaking. "I didn't agree to this." Lorraine stood behind him by resting her hands on my shoulders like a puppeteer, her fingers subtly digging into my flesh. "He's frightened," she told the man, her voice laced with a practiced sympathy. He doesn't understand what's best for him. The man nodded sympathetically to her. Not to me. It's common. We'll make the transition easy. My chest constricted, a suffocating tightness. Transition facility. Words that sounded permanent, words that sealed my fate. That evening, I tried one last time. When the nurse brought my dinner, I hurled the tray across the room, the plastic dishes clattering against the far wall, and bolted for the door. I made it halfway down the hall, a desperate, fleeting taste of freedom, before an orderly, a burly man with surprisingly gentle hands, tackled me to the tile. I shouted until my throat tore, until my voice was raw and broken. But the only person who came running was Lorraine. She crouched beside me, calm as ever, brushing hair from my sweat-soaked face, her touch a chilling parody of comfort. "See how dangerous you are to yourself?" she murmured, loud enough for the staff to hear, her voice a weapon. This is why I had to step in. The orderly hauled me back to bed, strapping my wrists loosely to the rails, a final humiliating restraint. Lorraine kissed my forehead before leaving, her lips cold against my skin. "Rest," she said. "Tomorrow we'll get you settled in your new home." The next morning, a van waited outside. I saw it through the window as they wheeled me down the hall, strapped to a gurney, my body numb, my spirit broken. It wasn't an ambulance. No flashing lights, no sirens, just an unmarked transport with tinted windows, a black void waiting to swallow me whole. Lorraine walked beside the stretcher, clutching a clipboard, her face serene, triumphant. She signed forms quickly, efficiently, like she'd done it 100 times, a practiced ritual. Every staff member smiled at her, thanked her for her dedication, praised her for being such a good sister. I screamed until my lungs burned, until my voice was nothing but a ragged whisper. Not one person looked twice. As they loaded me into the van, the heavy doors yawning open, Lorraine leaned down, her lips close to my ear, her breath a cold whisper. "You're safe now, Curtis," she said. "You'll never be alone again." The door slammed shut, sealing me in darkness. A final, definitive click. The engine rumbled to life, and that was the last time I saw the hospital. 3. The unseen audience. When my sister Chloe called me out of the blue, her voice a strained whisper asking to crash at my place in Chicago, I hesitated. We hadn't truly connected in years, not since high school. She'd always possessed an unnerving intensity, the kind of sister who'd casually dig through your phone when your back was turned, or meticulously memorize your passwords just in case. But her desperation was palpable, a raw edge in her tone that I couldn't ignore. Against my better judgment, I found myself saying yes. My apartment was a modest mid-rise near Lake View. Nothing extravagant, but it was decent enough. Secure entry, a small balcony overlooking the city, and neighbors who, thankfully, mostly kept to themselves. Chloe arrived with surprisingly little, just a single, well-worn suitcase and a laptop bag. Her hug was stiff, almost rehearsed, and her eyes, though meeting mine, seemed to hold a distant, calculating glint. "It's so good to be close to you again," she murmured, but the words felt hollow, a performance. At first, her presence seemed almost a blessing. She offered to cook elaborate meals, helped me meticulously clean the apartment, even reorganized my chaotic kitchen cabinets with an efficiency that bordered on obsessive. But then, the subtle, unsettling anomalies began. My phone charger, a constant fixture on my nightstand, would vanish, only to reappear plugged into an outlet in her room. My laptop, which I always closed, would be found open on the kitchen counter, a program running that I hadn't initiated, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. These were minor infractions, easily dismissed, yet they chipped away at my sense of privacy, leaving a faint, persistent unease. One evening, I returned home from a particularly draining day at work to find her cross-legged on the couch, utterly engrossed in my old home videos. Not hers, not family archives, but mine. Videos I'd shot with friends on my phone years ago, intimate moments, silly escapades, footage I hadn't uploaded anywhere, hadn't shared with anyone. A cold dread snaked through me. "Chloe, how did you get these?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She merely smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "You left them unlocked," she said, her gaze unwavering. "You should be more careful." I tried to brush it off, to rationalize it, but a heavy, leaden pit had formed in my stomach, growing larger with each passing day. By the second week, my phone itself seemed to be actively rebelling. Alarms would shriek to life at precisely 3:15 a.m., jolting me awake in the suffocating darkness. Random, nonsensical texts would be sent from my number to people I hadn't spoken to in years, cryptic messages that made no sense. One night, I woke to the faint, disembodied buzz of my own voice echoing through the apartment. A chilling, almost ghostly sound. I followed the sound, my heart pounding, to the living room, where I discovered Chloe had set up a small Bluetooth speaker. On a continuous loop, it was playing a recording of me sleeping, my soft breathing, the rustle of sheets, faint, unconscious whispers. I confronted her, my fury a hot, blinding wave. She didn't even flinch. She simply looked at me, her eyes wide and unblinking, and said, "I like listening. It makes me feel closer to you." The words were delivered with such an innocent, almost childlike sincerity that they were infinitely more disturbing than any outright malice. After that, I started noticing them, the cameras. Tiny, almost imperceptible black dots tucked into the most innocuous corners. One nestled discreetly in the kitchen vent, another camouflaged on the bookshelf, a third strategically placed near the balcony door. My paranoia, once a whisper, now screamed. I yanked one out, a tiny wire snapping, and stormed into her room, demanding answers. Her walls were a horrifying mosaic of sticky notes, dates, times, meticulously scribbled observations about me, what I ate, when I showered, what shows I watched. My private phone conversations, transcribed word for word, filled entire pages. Chloe didn't deny it. She didn't even look up from her laptop. She simply said, her voice calm and even, "You have no idea how many people care about you now. They're always watching." I froze, the blood draining from my face. "What do you mean, they?" My voice was barely a croak. She finally turned her screen toward me. It was a live stream. My bedroom, right there. My bed on full display to a scrolling chat window filled with strangers. Their comments flew by, a torrent of text. "He's waking up. Ask her to move the camera closer. Is he going to shower?" My chest seized, a cold, crushing weight. "You're streaming me?" I shouted, the words tearing from my throat. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, a grotesque rictus that didn't reach her eyes. "Not just streaming. They love us. They want to see what happens next." I lunged for her laptop, yanking the plug from the wall, and slammed her door shut behind me, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the doorknob. I locked myself in my room, frantically checking every corner, every crevice for hidden cameras, my mind racing, convinced I was missing something. Sleep was impossible. But when I woke up the next morning, something was taped to my mirror. A photo of me asleep in bed. A photo taken from just inches above my face. I didn't go to work that day. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, that photo, taped to my mirror, burned into my vision. The angle was too close, too deliberate, too intimate. Chloe had been in my room while I was sleeping, inches from my face, snapping photos while strangers watched, their comments scrolling across a screen. The violation was absolute. I decided with a chilling clarity that I was done. She had to leave. No excuses, no explanations. But when I knocked on her door, her room was empty. The bed was perfectly made. The single suitcase she'd brought was gone. For a fleeting moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Maybe she'd left on her own. Maybe this nightmare was over. The thought was quickly shattered by a faint sound coming from the living room. Laughter. Not Chloe's, not exactly. It was hundreds of voices, overlapping, distorted, a cacophony of unseen observers, all bleeding out from her laptop. I crept closer, my heart hammering against my ribs, and saw the screen. The livestream was still going, but not from her camera this time. It was from all of them. Every hidden camera I hadn't found yet, every angle of my apartment lit up on screen, switching views like a sick, voyeuristic reality show. The chat was a frenzy, lines of text flying past too fast to read, but I caught fragments. "Don't let him leave. She's behind you. Closer, closer." I spun around, my breath catching, but no one was there. That night, I couldn't stay still. A frantic energy propelled me through every inch of the apartment. I tore through vents, ripped down light fixtures, yanked cords out of the walls, a desperate, futile attempt to reclaim my space, my privacy. And still, I couldn't find them all. Every time I thought I'd won, a faint red light would blink from another corner, another hidden lens, mocking my efforts. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, a notification. I opened it and froze. It was a text from an unknown number, a live stream link. Against every instinct, every fiber of my being screaming no, I tapped it. It wasn't the cameras this time. It was Chloe. She was in the hallway outside my apartment, staring straight into her phone, whispering to her unseen audience. "He doesn't trust me anymore. Should I go inside?" The chat exploded with yes messages, hundreds of them, a digital roar. My blood went cold. I ran to the door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. No footsteps, no breathing. Slowly, cautiously, I unlatched the chain and cracked it open. The hallway was empty, but taped to the outside of my door was another photo. Not of me, of Chloe. Smiling wide, her eyes glinting with a predatory satisfaction, standing over me as I slept. I slammed the door shut, panic clawing at my chest, a primal scream trapped in my throat. I called building security, begged them to check the hallway cameras, to confirm what I knew I'd seen. When they called me back 20 minutes later, their answer made my skin crawl. "There's no one on the footage," the security guard said, his voice flat. "Not your sister, not anyone." That's when the chilling truth solidified. Chloe wasn't just filming me. She wasn't just streaming me. She was editing reality itself for them, for her audience. She was creating a narrative, and I was merely a character in her twisted show. The final night I spent in that apartment, I woke to the sound of clapping. Slow, deliberate claps echoing from the living room, a chilling applause for an unseen performance. I crept out, a hard knot of fear in my throat, and found Chloe sitting on the couch, her laptop open, thousands of faceless viewers glowing on the screen. She didn't even look at me. She just whispered, her voice barely audible above the digital chatter, "They're ready for the finale." Then she turned the laptop around. And there I was, not standing in the room, not looking at the screen, but tied to a chair in the corner, eyes wide with terror, mouth gagged, struggling against my bonds. I staggered back, gasping, my mind reeling, but the chair in the corner was empty. Nothing there. When I looked again, Chloe was gone too. The laptop sat open, streaming to a faceless crowd that was still typing, still laughing, still begging for more. I left that night with nothing but the clothes on my back, my mind shattered. My sense of reality irrevocably warped. I never saw Chloe again, but sometimes when I scroll through random forums or stumble into the dark corners of the internet, I see clips. Grainy, distorted footage of me in that apartment, sleeping, eating, staring into the mirror, my private moments laid bare for an unseen audience. And every single time, the caption is the same. Live with sister episode ongoing. Before the road trip to nowhere, when my sister Hannah called me out of the blue, suggesting we embark on a cross-country road trip together, I almost laughed. A genuine, disbelieving chuckle escaped my lips. We hadn't been close in years, our relationship a thin, frayed thread stretched across states and unspoken resentments. Hannah had never been the let's bond type. She was always fiercely independent, almost aloof, but she insisted, her voice holding an unusual, almost persuasive warmth. She claimed she was moving to New Mexico for a fresh start, a clean slate, and wanted me along for company, for the shared experience. Against every instinct, every whisper of caution in my gut, I found myself saying yes. A small, hopeful part of me yearned for a reconnection, a return to the sisterhood we once shared. The first day was surprisingly pleasant. We sang along, off-key and with genuine abandon, to old songs on the radio, the kind that transported us back to our teenage years. We swapped stories about high school crushes and embarrassing moments, even managed to joke about our eccentric parents, without a hint of bitterness. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, she almost felt like a sister again. A familiar presence beside me, sharing the open road. The miles melted away under a bright, indifferent sky. But by the second day, the subtle cracks began to show, fissures in the facade of normalcy. At a gas station just outside Des Moines, a sprawling anonymous stop filled with the smell of diesel and stale coffee, I reached for my wallet to pay for snacks and realized it was missing. I tore the car apart, frantically checking every pocket, every compartment, but it was gone. Hannah just smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, and said, "Relax, I'll cover us." She said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, like she had been expecting this, waiting for this precise moment. A cold, heavy stone settled in my stomach, but I didn't press. The unease was a faint hum, easily ignored amidst the vastness of the highway. That night at a cheap, anonymous roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and thin walls, I woke around 3 a.m., a sudden, urgent need to use the bathroom. Hannah's bed, a twin pushed against the far wall, was empty. My heart gave a small, nervous flutter. I cautiously peeked outside the window, pulling back the flimsy curtain just enough to see. And then I froze. She was standing in the dimly lit parking lot, leaning against another car, a dark sedan I didn't recognize. She was talking to a man, a stranger whose face was obscured by shadow, but whose posture spoke volumes. He looked nervous, kept glancing around like he didn't want to be seen, his shoulders hunched. Hannah touched his arm, a gesture of unsettling intimacy, laughed at something he said, then, as if sensing my gaze, glanced back toward our room. I ducked away instantly, my breath catching in my throat before she could catch me. By morning, the man was gone. His car, the dark sedan, sat abandoned on the highway's shoulder miles down the road, driver's door wide open, luggage spilled haphazardly into the dewy grass. Hannah didn't slow when we passed it. She didn't even acknowledge it. She just said, her voice flat, almost rehearsed, "Some people can't handle long trips." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, a chilling dismissal. The third day brought a deeper, more pervasive sense of dread. At breakfast, in a greasy spoon diner with chipped formica tables, I tried calling a friend, desperate to hear another, sane voice, a connection to the world I was rapidly losing. But my phone was dead, completely unresponsive. When I plugged it into the car charger, nothing happened. Hannah reached across the table, the movement swift and precise, plucked it from my hands, and slipped it into her bag. "No need for distractions," she said, her eyes meeting mine with an unnerving intensity. "Just focus on the road." Every choice, every decision was hers. She picked the diners, the motels, the winding back roads that seemed to lead further and further from civilization. The more I noticed, the clearer it became. I wasn't traveling with her. I was being escorted, a prisoner on a journey I didn't understand. That night, we checked into another nameless motel, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap disinfectant. The clerk, a tired-looking man with vacant eyes, barely looked at us, just slid a single key across the counter. Hannah took it before I could even reach. Inside the room, she insisted I take the bed, a lumpy mattress covered in a faded floral spread, while she unrolled a thin blanket on the floor. I pretended to sleep, my eyes squeezed shut, my body rigid with tension. Hours later, I heard movement. When I cracked my eyes open, she was kneeling by my backpack, carefully, methodically pulling things out. My clothes, my phone charger, my worn leather journal, the one I'd kept since college. She stacked them neatly, almost reverently, then carried them to the bathroom and came back empty-handed. The next morning, my backpack held nothing but a few crumpled shirts. Everything else was gone. When I demanded to know where my stuff was, her gaze was unwavering, that same faint, unsettling smile playing on her lips. "We don't need extra weight," she said, her voice soft, almost tender. "Besides, you have me. What else do you need?" The question hung in the air, a chilling declaration of ownership. By day 4, I wasn't even sure if we were headed west anymore. The road signs were rusted, faded, some too weathered to read, their directions lost to time and neglect. Hannah never let me drive, never let me even glance at the map. When I asked where we were, her answer was always the same, delivered with an unnerving calm. "Don't worry, we're almost there." The landscape outside the window had become a blur of endless, desolate fields, the sky a vast, indifferent canvas. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and angry orange, she turned off the highway onto a narrow, unpaved gravel road. The car bounced and rattled, kicking up clouds of dust that choked the air. We drove for what felt like miles, deeper and deeper into empty, forgotten fields, until a dark, hulking shape appeared ahead. A barn. An ancient, dilapidated structure, its wood weathered to a skeletal gray, its roof sagging like a broken spine. She parked, killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of crickets. She turned to me, her smile, that same faint, unsettling smile, hadn't faded once the entire trip. "We'll rest here tonight," she said, her voice a calm, chilling pronouncement. The air inside the barn was thick, heavy with the smell of rust, mildew, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that made my stomach churn. Chains, thick and rusted, hung from beams overhead, swaying almost imperceptibly in the stagnant air. And in the far corner, barely visible in the encroaching shadows, were two people, strangers, bound, gagged, their eyes wide with terror, locked on mine, pleading, desperate. I stumbled back, my throat closing, a choked gasp escaping my lips. "What the hell is this, Hannah?" She shut the massive barn doors behind us, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and slid a heavy, rusted lock into place. The click was sickeningly final. Her smile widened just slightly, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "This," she said calmly, her voice devoid of emotion, "is the part I couldn't tell you about." My first, primal instinct was to run, to claw my way out of that suffocating space. I backed toward the doors, my hands fumbling for a latch, a weakness, anything. But Hannah was already standing in front of them, keys dangling from her fingers, a mocking jingle. She slid them into her pocket and looked at me with an unnerving intensity, the way someone looks at a dog trying to bolt from its leash. "You were supposed to trust me," she said, her voice flat, devoid of warmth, "but you always ruin things." The captives whimpered, muffled behind their gags, their eyes wide with a desperate, silent plea. Their clothes were filthy, torn, their wrists rubbed raw and bleeding rope burns. My pulse hammered so hard it hurt, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. "Who are they?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Hannah tilted her head, calm as ever, her gaze sweeping over the bound figures. "Passengers," she said, as if explaining a simple fact. "Same as you." I lunged for the chains hanging from the rafters, a desperate, foolish hope that I could swing one at her, incapacitate her, buy myself a moment of escape. But she moved faster than I could have imagined. Her hand clamped onto my arm with a strength I didn't know she possessed, her fingers like steel bands. She shoved me back against the rough wooden wall so hard my teeth rattled, a sharp pain shooting through my skull. "You're not leaving," she said flatly, her voice a chilling monotone. "Not until you understand." In the corner, half hidden by a stack of old hay bales, I spotted my backpack. I scrambled for it, my fingers fumbling with the zipper, and ripped it open. My stomach dropped, a wave of nausea washing over me. Inside, not my belongings, but IDs. Dozens of them. Driver's licenses, student cards, passports. None of them mine, none of them Hannah's. They were strangers, faces of people who hadn't made it out, their lives reduced to laminated cards. I gagged, bile rising in my throat. "What did you do?" Hannah crouched in front of me, her expression unreadable, her eyes like dark, bottomless pools. "Every mile has a cost," she murmured, her voice a chilling whisper. "Gas, food, time, people. You can't drive forever without paying." She paused, her gaze unwavering. I just figured out a better way. The barn air felt heavier, closing in, suffocating me. The captives shifted, their eyes wild with terror, their muffled cries cutting through the oppressive silence. Hannah stood, paced in front of them like a teacher giving a lesson, her shadow stretching long and distorted in the dim light. "Do you know how many times I've done this?" she asked, her voice steady, almost conversational. 12. 13? I lost count, but no one ever finds them. The road swallows them up. She walked back to me, leaned down, and placed something cold and rough in my trembling hand. A rope. A thick, coarse length of rope. "It's your turn now," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Tie one of them up tighter or sit in the chair yourself, but someone's not leaving this barn." My hands shook violently, the rope feeling like a venomous snake in my grasp. "You're insane!" I choked out, my voice raw with terror. She smiled. "No," she said, her eyes glinting with a terrifying rationality. "I'm efficient." I dropped the rope as if it had burned me and bolted for the doors, slamming my shoulder into them again and again, a desperate, futile attempt to break free. The lock didn't budge. Behind me, Hannah laughed. Not loud, not manic, but a steady, almost gentle laugh that told me, with chilling certainty, that she wasn't worried. I turned back and saw her standing between me and the others, her silhouette elongated and distorted by the dim light of the single, bare bulb hanging overhead. She wasn't holding a weapon, she didn't need one. The barn itself was her weapon. The chains, the ropes, the miles of empty fields outside, the suffocating isolation. The two captives began thrashing wildly, their muffled screams desperate, as if they knew with a horrifying certainty what was coming. Hannah turned toward them, then back to me, her gaze unwavering. "Family doesn't leave," she said softly, her voice a chilling caress. And now, neither will you. The bulb overhead flickered once, a final dying gasp, then burned out, plunging us into absolute suffocating blackness. Somewhere in that terrifying dark, I heard the sound of metal scraping against wood, ropes tightening, and the wet thud of something heavy hitting the ground. By the time I staggered awake, the barn was empty. The captives were gone. So was Hannah. Only my backpack remained, lying in the dirt, and inside it, a fresh driver's license. Mine. The photo had been altered, my name scratched out with a crude, violent stroke. Across the bottom, written in thick black marker, was a single, chilling word: passenger.